To say that Hollywood is in crisis is a crushing understatement. The pandemic seems to have decimated the box office, thousands are losing their jobs, and the actors and writers are on strike simultaneously for the first time since 1960. So it's the perfect time to get the inside track on what's going on from this week's guest, Matt Belloni. Matt started his career in Hollywood as an entertainment lawyer, but really made his name in journalism at The Hollywood Reporter, where he became editorial director. In 2021, he became one of the founding partners of a new digital service, Puck News, and his podcast, The Town, is the definitive guide to the state of play in Hollywood right now. Matt and I discuss where reporters sit in the Hollywood ecosystem, the reasons for the chaos in the entertainment industry, and whether a world of AI-generated nannies is something to be fought for or against. Enjoy. Hi Matt, welcome to the pod.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Absolute pleasure. I always like to start with a fun question just to kick things off. And so my fun question to you is this. If you could interview one person from the entire history of Hollywood, who would that be and why?
Interesting for the entire history of Hollywood. I think Lew Wasserman would be a fascinating figure because he really helped transform the industry from a studio-dominated industry where there was a studio system that held actors under contracts forever to a talent-dominated system where the talent really fought for and achieved the right to go from job to job, studio to studio. He built up one of the biggest talent agencies, then turned it into a studio. The government had to get involved. So he'd be a fascinating figure, really was the kind of power broker of Hollywood. As for people who are still alive, I've always wanted to interview Rupert Murdoch, and I never have. I've interviewed his sons, but I've never interviewed Rupert himself. And I think that he is a really fascinating figure in media. Don't always love his products, but he's certainly come at this business from a particular perspective and had a lot of success. So
I think we'll come back to the town of Hollywood ending up being more creatively focused than studio focused, because that seems very topical. But were you a big fan of film and TV when you were growing up, and did that influence your decision to become initially an entertainment lawyer when you graduated from college?
Yeah, I think so. I was certainly a fan of film and TV growing up. I was always, there opening weekend for movies. I used to read everything I could find about movies, magazines, newspapers, pre-internet age. I would, scrounge whatever I could find. I feel like the reason I gravitated towards entertainment law was because of that. It was an industry that I was always fascinated with. I loved, and I figured, why not? If I was going to be a lawyer, why not work in that industry? And then it sort of got me to gravitate towards media as well.
And do you think actually your legal training and practice has helped you in your subsequent career?
Oh, sure. I mean, first of all, definitely. I mean, first of all, the way I approach both reporting and writing is from a legal perspective. I'm always very careful about the stuff that I'm writing and, avoiding legal problems. And it helped me when I was editing Hollywood Reporter. I was the editor during the height of the Me Too movement, when we were writing a lot about accusations against powerful men. And my legal background came in handy every single day based on how we were approaching sourcing, what we could and couldn't say based on the proof that we had and didn't have. I was consulting with our company lawyers all the time, and it really benefited me having that background. And also, I think people who deal with me on a daily basis would say that I have a kind of litigator mentality when I approach stories. I am inquisitive and will challenge people where others might not. I think lawyers generally make good journalists because they aren't afraid to ask tough and uncomfortable questions.
So you mentioned the Hollywood Reporter. So at some point you made the leap from being a lawyer into being a reporter and ultimately joined the Hollywood Reporter in 2006. You were editorial director for the magazine from 2016 to 2020. How did you try and differentiate the Hollywood Reporter from other outlets, whether that's a rival trade title like Variety, a newspaper like the LA Times, or a digital only service like Deadline?
When I came to Hollywood Reporter in the mid 2000s, it was a very stodgy, old school trade magazine. It was a daily print product. It had been steeped in traditions that, were going back 80 years. And I brought a legal perspective to it. My job there when I first arrived was to work on a legal oriented supplement that would focus on litigation and the issues facing the deal makers and regulatory stuff. And just by doing that and having the relationships with these lawyers from the community that I came from kind of distinguished me, because the trades weren't writing about lawyers. They weren't writing about these legal fights. And the people there didn't have these relationships. So I was able to do that. I also, as a lawyer, I got exposed to all aspects of the entertainment business. When you are litigating a case on behalf of Peter Jackson, the director of Lord of the Rings, over the profits from the movies, which Warner Brothers had claimed were not very profitable. And Peter Jackson saw the box office numbers and said, wait a second, these are extremely profitable. You need to pay me what I am contractually obligated to be paid. I got a chance to look at all of the books and the stuff that you don't see in the media very often, and how these studios make money on these movies for years and years and years after they come out. So all of that background really helped me when I went over to the media side, because I understood the waterfall. I understood where the money is made. And when you understand how the money is made, you sort of understand the business. And that really helped me from the beginning. As for your question as to what we distinguish ourselves as, when I was at Hollywood Reporter, we were bought by a private equity firm, and we were transferred from a daily print newspaper to a weekly glossy magazine format in print. And we had a lot of investment to beef up our news gathering skills for digital. And I was very involved in all of that, and sort of elevating the print product to feel a little bit more luxury and more like an experience and an event when you received it. It wasn't just a representation of what news was already online. It had elegant photography. It had elevated writers. It had long feature stories. It had social coverage and lifestyle coverage. A lot of the things that I think make a print magazine something that you want to open, a world you want to enter. And that really distinguished us from what was in the market for the Hollywood trades at the time. Subsequently, the competitor Variety dropped what it was doing and tried to copy what Hollywood Reporter was doing. And then Deadline was still doing the kind of newsy stuff. Now all the trades are owned by the same guy, and they're all sort of, they have great people there, but they are sort of the same. But at the time, back in 2010, we were really trying to distinguish Hollywood Reporter from what the others were doing.
And where do journalists sit in the Hollywood ecosystem? Because there are so many different tribes and different constituencies. Where do journalists sit in the overall world of Hollywood?
That's an interesting question, because I think the easy answer is they're at the bottom. Though no one really wants the media people to be included in the high level conversations. But Hollywood is an interesting industry because perception is so important. So I think certain journalists have an outsized profile and role in the industry because of the perception that they can impugn on people working in Hollywood. So, as someone who has been around the industry a long time, you can often find yourself in places that a lot of people would love to be in, dinner tables or events or, secret screenings or things like that, even experienced executives in the industry would love to be invited to, and media will get invited because that perception is so important. I've always been very open and honest about the fact that nobody actually cares about me personally. These are not typically my friends. I do have friends in the industry, but I'm not getting invited to these things because I'm particularly smart or friendly. I'm getting invited because of what I can potentially offer to people. And I've never really forgotten that. I think a lot of journalists who are in these circles tend to think that they're cool, and I am definitely not cool.
So you left the Hollywood Reporter in 2020 and
Mm-hmm.
went on to become a founding partner of Puck News in May
Mm-hmm.
21. I was reminded that in the early 1970s, Tom Wolfe coined the phrase "the new journalism" to describe a new form of writing that transformed reporting into a new narrative form. Is Puck News part of another evolution of a new journalism that includes audio as well as writing and a new way of doing things?
I think so. I think the transition we're going through right now is a good one because for the past 10, 15 years, the emphasis in news and media has been on traffic, on eyeballs, on increasing the number of views on a particular piece of content. And, that started with outlets like Huffington Post and BuzzFeed and some of the others that really amassed large audiences based in part on their adjacency to these social media platforms that were growing large, but also because of SEO and other things and writing stories in ways that caught virality. I think we're seeing a backlash to that now and a real focus on developing an actual audience, an actual readership, an actual clientele for the news product. And I like to think that Puck is part of that because we are essentially a digital expression of the magazine ethos that has been popular for 80, 90 years in print. And print is dying, and those brands are declining in relevance and in power. But there's going to be a new set of powerful outlets that I think will take the ethos of magazines, which are essentially bundles of writers. That's what a magazine is. It's a perspective, a worldview, and a bundle of writers. And that's what we're doing at Puck. We are a group of about 10, we're about 12 journalists right now who write specifically, longer form, column oriented. We break news, but we're not a breaking news service. And our writers have a voice, and they have an audience in these power corners of America, which is politics, finance, Hollywood, and Silicon Valley. And now fashion, we've added fashion. And our writers are speaking to a class of person that is in the know. They know what's going on. We're not trying to be everything for everyone. There's a certain type of person that Puck is not for. And if you're a casual drive-by reader that might have stumbled upon a news article through Facebook or SEO, that's kind of not who we're going for. We're trying to develop a community, basically, of readers who are interested in what's going on in the power centers of the country and the stories behind the story, the inside talk and conversation in these industries. And I think that's our lane. And that's part of a new approach to media where it's not just about getting eyeballs to serve ads to, it's about developing a relationship with readers that you then can monetize and build a community around.
And given the work that you do, which is audio based as well as the writing, are you still a reporter at heart, or are you also now somewhat of a performer?
That's a good question. I mean, I see my podcast, which I do 3 times a week for The Ringer, which is a studio owned by Spotify, started by Bill Simmons. I see the audio expression as just part of the journalistic mission. It's another format. I don't see myself as a performer. I'm not particularly funny. I'm not particularly witty about this stuff. I just have a passion for entertainment, and I have access to information that others might not. And I try to utilize that and come up with a format where I'm telling you something you don't already know and bringing insights, hopefully, with guests that you haven't heard. And you get in and you get out 20 to 30 minutes, and that's your day. So to the extent that the show is caught on, I really think it's because nobody cares what I did this weekend. Nobody wants to know what I had for breakfast. And 90% of podcasts are just blather. They're just, people that you want to hang out with, that nobody wants to hang out with me. They want to know what's going on, and they want information and insights. So I try to deliver that without the fat around it. And hopefully it's found an audience because of that.
The Town is the name of the podcast, and LA feels like a town in transition right now. There are two strikes underway. How would you sum up the town right now?
I think chaos is a good word. It's really chaotic. Nobody knows what the future of Hollywood is. I think that the fact that we started this podcast about 18 months ago was very fortuitous timing, because the industry has sort of fallen off a cliff since then. We had a record-breaking 10-year run-up in the amount of content that was being produced in this peak TV era, where there were 600 scripted shows on the air, and all of these streaming services trying to spend money to compete and grow at a mass scale to be the next Netflix, which is at 230 million worldwide. At the same time, you had this unprecedented box office run where studios like Disney were producing $5-6 billion grossers a year in 2019. And the global appetite for these tentpole movies was super strong. All of a sudden, COVID hits. Well, what is the movie business after COVID? People discovered that they liked watching this stuff at home. So where does that leave these companies that make $200-300 million movies? It's a tough business to be in. So that's kind of where we are, and nobody knows what the next few years might bring. And now, obviously, we're in a strike where there are two guilds striking over many of these same economic issues that have fueled the industry for the past 10 years. So it really feels like an inflection point for the entertainment industry. And I position myself as kind of in the center of that hurricane. And hopefully I can bring some insight to people that are both experiencing it and those who are on the outside looking in and watching it unfold.
A lot of industries, I mean, you think of the auto industry, manufacturing, retail, they've all in the last few years and decades been transformed by globalization and technological innovation. Is Hollywood the modern equivalent of a big industry city like Detroit that relied on the auto industry, and it's facing that same kind of seismic shift in the industry dynamics?
I think that's accurate. I think that the entertainment industry has had a custom and practice for 100 years, which was very unique and came up in an environment that depended on essentially an oligopoly of studio distributors that were so big and had international apparatuses that could make and distribute content worldwide. And it was very difficult for outsiders to come in and compete with that. Now, the internet breaks down those barriers. Netflix and Amazon come in and say, listen, we're going to be global television networks that can distribute content all over the world for next to nothing. And we're going to start spending money on this in a way that the studios that have done this for 100 years, they can't compete with us, because the stock market sees that if Netflix can get to 300-400 million subscribers worldwide, they win. That money is going to fund content forever. And the market embraced that. That's a hugely disruptive moment for the entertainment industry. And frankly, the traditional studios sat on their heels and initially enabled Netflix by selling all of their content to Netflix to help build them up while getting some pretty big checks to pad their own bottom line and their bonuses. And now everybody spent the past 5 years trying to match Netflix by launching their own services. And we're finding that the market is not embracing the other companies as much as it is Netflix. So they're sort of left in a no man's land here, where the traditional television business that has fueled the industry for the past 30 years is dying. The streaming business, which Netflix is dominating and which Apple and Amazon are in, sort of as loss leaders for their other products, those businesses are doing great. And the studios haven't figured out how to make the same amount of money from streaming, but they are spending a ton of money. So the economics there don't make sense, and the market is punishing these companies.
You talk about the market, and the market often means the financial markets. And I suppose a question that then ties back in with what we're seeing on the union side of things is, does that reflect a focus on Wall Street rather than Main Street? That Wall Street has really become the determinant of how you operate your business in Hollywood. And mainstream, by that I mean creativity about entertaining the general public, is now no longer enough to get you by.
Well, it's not a secret that Wall Street fueled the switch to streaming. I mean, the traditional windowing business, and by that I mean movies come out in theaters, they then go to a what's called a pay one window, which is the first viewing on on demand or on television, and then they go through what's called a waterfall, where a movie or television show is exploited in countless different ways across different mediums. That was all upended and put into a streaming market where things went directly to streaming or directly after theaters to streaming. That happened because of the market. Netflix was getting a gigantic valuation. Everybody else, the analysts were saying, are you all in on streaming? Are you all in on streaming? And these companies had to have an answer for that, or else the market wasn't going to benefit them. So they all switched. They all launched their own services, and they all started putting movies directly on their services, spending billions of dollars to do so, upending the traditional model and foregoing a lot of that revenue. And that was all fueled by the market. Now, once the market turned on that strategy, you're seeing these companies try to figure out what the market wants. And right now, it seems to want profitability. It wants people to show that streaming is a real business. Netflix has shown that. It is now making money on its streaming service. Warner Brothers Discovery claims that it's going to make money on Max by the end of the year. Disney claims that it's going to be profitable for Disney Plus next year. And that's what the market wants to see. So I think the answer to the question is yes. These people, these executives know that if their stock price doesn't improve, they're going to be out. That's what really agitates boards and shareholders, is when you're not delivering value for them. And these companies were able to deliver value for decades because of the cable bundle. The cable bundle is the greatest invention in the history of media. Consumers pay for content they don't watch. I mean, it's amazing. You have channels that drive viewership, and then you have a bunch of other channels that nobody watches, but you can throw into a cable bundle and get paid a carriage fee from every subscriber to the bundle, plus advertising. Great business. But there's no longer 100 million people signed up to the cable bundle. It's down to like 70, 75. And in a couple of years, it'll be down to 50. And that is a dwindling business. And the streaming business has not caught up.
Well, I'd like to come back to that actually, because I think the bundle is such an important aspect. But I couldn't help but reflect on my career as somebody in the international TV sales and distribution business. I know what you mean by the waterfall, and that was also something that struck me about seeing Fran Drescher leading SAG, the Actors Union, because I used to sell The Nanny internationally, and it sold very well. It was a show that ran for 146 episodes on CBS from 1993 to 1996. So old school network television. And so the sales that I did combined with US syndication were the way that many actors and producers and other profit participants made money in the early 90s and in the 2000s.
And they made a lot of money.
Let's call that Nanny 1.0. But even in the early 2000s, Sony Pictures, who were the studio behind the show, realized that local audiences and international audiences in particular really responded very well to local content. And as a result, over the last 25 years, Sony has produced hundreds of episodes of The Nanny, taking the format and making it in local markets, whether it's the Russian nanny, the Argentinian nanny, the Indonesian nanny. Nannies everywhere. So let's call that Nanny 2.0, an era that saw the erosion of the ubiquity of US movies and series and the rise of local programming and the internationalization of content, often by platforms with, as you say, hundreds of millions of subscribers. As an observer of Hollywood, do you see the current industrial action as primarily an attempt to reinstate the transparency and the economic benefits of the 146 episode network TV era of Nanny 1.0? And if so, what are the Guild's chance of success?
I do think there's an element of nostalgia that is fueling these strikes. The Nanny is a perfect example of that. That is not a show that people would put up on a pedestal as being a Friends or a Seinfeld, but that was a very profitable show. And it was profitable because of the traditional television business models that had been perfected over a couple decades, where they got the first run on CBS, but CBS didn't own it. Sony owned it. So Sony was able to take that show, like you said, to the international markets, make a lot of money on that. They shared in those profits with the talent that was involved, that got a piece of the residuals and the profit participation on the show based on whatever they negotiated. And it is still, to this day, making money in syndication on both traditional networks, international, and streaming services. So that is a profitable show almost 30 years later. The Netflix model is not that. The Netflix model takes the show that, let's say you're making The Nanny today. They put all the elements together. Maybe they pay Fran Drescher more than what she would have made had she just done a show for a CBS pilot season. She gets a bigger check up front. Her agent gets to say, I got you 20% more than your quote. But Netflix owns the show. Sony doesn't own the show. Netflix controls the worldwide distribution rights. They don't sell it into syndication. They don't put it on international television. They don't exploit it in multiple windows. It sits on the Netflix service forever. And there's no profit participation for Fran Drescher. There are residuals. There are residuals in streaming. They're not quite as lucrative as some of the traditional broadcast residuals, but there's no profit participation. And that is a model that the talent community is sort of waking up to as saying, you know what, long term, is this the best for us? Is it okay that we don't share in the success of something? Is it okay that we are bought out of the process? That as this show becomes more and more profitable for the company that commissioned it, we don't share in that. And that, I think, is fueling this animosity that's led to 2 strikes, because this is what they're asking for. They're asking specifically for a success metric, the actors are. They want 2% of the revenue on hits. And there's a bunch of ways they say that they could define that. And it's very difficult to define that because these streaming services have different success metrics than traditional networks that looked at the Nielsen ratings and could assign a value as to what they're making, what the viewership was. But they want in on that process. And the deal makers that work for these actors have not been able to achieve that. And they are hoping that with a strike, they can.
If you're a betting man, where would you place your bets on the outcome?
On this specific success metric issue, I think it's going to be really tough because of exactly what I just said, because the metrics for these companies are so different. What is a success for Netflix is not necessarily what is a success for Paramount Global, which owns CBS. So, how do you come up with a framework that measures success? I think they should just do straight viewership. That is really the only universal metric that can best approximate what success is, because it doesn't matter how you monetize. If more people are watching, it's probably better for your service. So just require a level of transparency. These companies have to release certain amount of viewership data, and then the guild can calculate what success means. That's probably, in my view, the best way. Going off of one of these third-party data companies, or going off of what churn is, or profitability, or the stock price, all of that is different for each company.
And are we looking at a future Nanny 3.0 where there are 100 versions of the Nanny, all generated by AI? And is that something that everybody's trying to avoid, or should we be embracing it?
Well, that is another one of these issues that both the writers and the actors are putting up a fight on. The writers fear that ChatGPT will churn out scripts and writers will be hired for a day or two of work to punch it up, and that the authorship of the script will be some computer and the studio will own it. The Guild doesn't want that to happen. The actors similarly are saying, if I'm in your movie, you shouldn't have then the right to digitally recreate me for a sequel without paying me. The actors are interesting because they're not asking to ban AI. They are instead asking for consent provisions, meaningful consent, not a boilerplate clause in the contract that everyone has to sign before they test for a pilot. They want a meaningful negotiation on AI. They want to be paid if their image is used, and they want consent over how it is used. So that'll be interesting to see what the studios agree to, because that seems like a fundamental issue for these actors.
We'll look out for how that plays out and listen to the updates on the town. So, as you say, you talked about the bundle. Content businesses have historically been built on the bundle, the aggregation of a lot of creativity and entertainment in one place for a single fee. A newspaper was a bundle, and you said earlier, a magazine is a bundle. An album is a bundle, and cable TV was and just about still is a bundle of entertainment services, some more premium than others. Technology has allowed content to be fragmented and unbundled. For example, as you say, allowing TV subscribers to pick one or two services rather than 60 plus, pay less to their cable or satellite provider, and generally avoid advertising. These are all basically the business models that funded a large part of TV and also the film business. We're at the stage now, to quote Bob Iger, and you talked about this on a recent episode of The Town, where linear TV networks are no longer core to a media company like Disney, despite their ongoing profitability. So can the entertainment business reinvent itself in the way music has done, and you guys are attempting at Puck, and do you have a sense of what that might look like?
I do think that the industry will find a new normal and come to a new model. It probably will not be as lucrative as the cable TV model, just as the streaming model has not been as lucrative as the album model was at its peak. It's a good business, and the music industry has rebounded, and the labels have found other ways to make money, like with 360 deals, which allow them to participate in the revenue that is earned from touring. But I don't think that the entertainment industry is going to go back to a cable television windfall. They've got to figure out the next big thing, whether it's making money from charging more at theaters, whether it's significantly upping the prices of these streaming services or cycling content in and out to various windows to make more money. There's got to be a focus on profitability for these companies because it's really rough out there right now.
And do you think we'll see a new bundle, but an SVOD bundle, where you get the equivalent of the old cable packages, but multiple SVOD services in your bundle?
I think eventually, yes, that there will be a rebundling. I know several of these tech companies like YouTube and Amazon and Apple, they would like to be the rebundler. And if you look at their stores, they're just as happy to sell you Max on Amazon Prime Video as they are to show their own Prime content. And that's because ultimately Amazon is a retailer. It wants to be the everything store, and everything includes entertainment. So they want to be the place that bundles all this stuff. We'll see. Maybe $100 for 6 of the top services. That would be a great bargain, and it would probably be very popular.
Very good. Well, finally, I always like to end with another fun question. It's usually content based. And so my question is, if you were offered the chance to put a Matt Belloni tile together on an SVOD menu, which 3 TV series or movies would you choose for a service that we're going to call Puckflix?
Huh. Well, my favorite show of all time is probably Cheers, the 80s and 90s sitcom. So that would have to be on there. I'd probably put, let's see, Mad Men would probably be on there. That's probably my second favorite show of all time. Maybe West Wing. West Wing would probably be my third. Love that show.
Yeah, I think I'd have all of those on mine as well. Well, Matt Belloni, thank you so much for being a guest on the podcast. Your newsletter is called What I'm Hearing, and it's been great that on Here Comes Pod, what I've been hearing has been Matt Belloni. So
well, I appreciate that.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.